Welcome back to the Point Sports Report. This is week 4. I'm Ryan, and I'm joined again by Michael and Marcus. We're gonna jump straight into some games this week that we've got, and kind of just get a little sense of what's gonna happen. We got 5 quick games that we're gonna go over, and then we've got 5 maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little better matchups. We're just gonna start jumping straight into the action on Thursday. Clemson, Georgia Tech. Michael. What do you got here for this game, and maybe a little prediction?
Yeah, so Clemson hasn't won at Georgia Tech the last 5 times they've played there. So going back to 2003, they haven't beaten them in Atlanta. So I think that that's definitely a really big factor. The line is currently 9.5, which I thought was really interesting because, gosh, that's a lot of points. At home, it's almost like they want you to take the under. So what I'm actually going to do is take the over. I think Clemson's going to cover 9.5 on the road. I understand that they haven't played very well lately, but this is their first true test. If you're a Clemson fan, you know that they play to the level of their opponents. I just think the really tricky thing about this game is it is a Thursday night, so not a ton of time to prepare for the triple option offense, which is, the less time you have to prepare for, the worse you're probably going to do against it. So this could be a really crazy game.
I'm actually going to go with Georgia Tech on this one. I haven't been too impressed with what Clemson's been doing. Georgia Tech really hasn't played anyone worth any value. They played British Columbia and only won by they played Boston College and only won by 3.
They may as well be British Columbia.
They only won by 3, but they did play in Ireland. And so, you could count that or chalk that up to, being in a different country, different time zone completely, not used to playing at that time, whatnot. So that, and then they played Mercer, only won 35-10, but then they played Vanderbilt and won 38-7. Yes, Vanderbilt is not the elite SEC team as is, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, anyone like that. It still is an SEC team. Clemson did beat Auburn early on. We don't really know how good Auburn is yet. They're not bad. But I do give this one to Georgia Tech. Like Michael said, they haven't won the last 5 times they played there. And I think that really gives the advantage to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is 3-0. There are some teams that are ranked right now, like Ole Miss, that I strongly have feelings against being ranked with 2 losses when you've got Georgia Tech 3-0. So I think they should have been in the top 25. I believe I put them in my top 25. And with a win over Clemson, they'll jump pretty high, in my opinion. So I give this one to Georgia Tech, but I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, and, they put 38 on Vandy. Vanderbilt is known for their defense, so I think that win looks even better than, Vandy. I know they're a fairly weak team, but they don't give up 38 points. Like, that just doesn't happen. So right. I think it's a very scary game for Clemson.
Clemson is coming into this game averaging 36 points on offense. Georgia Tech 30 points on offense. Clemson 12 points average on defense, and Georgia Tech giving up 10 points on defense. So it's very, very even. As you guys mentioned, I believe Georgia Tech has a little bit tougher of a schedule to this point. It's a big game for both of them, and followed by big games as well for Georgia Tech with Miami and Pittsburgh, and Clemson followed by Louisville. So it's really a jumping off point for the season. The edge, because of how even these teams are, I think the edge goes to 1, the triple option, and 2, the fact that the game's at Georgia Tech, and I do like your Georgia Tech pick there. We got another game, USC and Utah, another really sneaky matchup. Marcus, how about you give us a quick little prediction?
My brother lives in Utah, and as much as I dislike BYU fans, he says that the Utah fans are worse because he lives closer to Salt Lake, so he gets hit on both sides. But he was asking me what I thought of this game specifically, and I think it's a tough one. Yes, Utah's 3-0. It's in Salt Lake, and it's extremely hard to play at Rice-Eccles Stadium if you're not Utah. Then again, we've talked about USC and how athletic they are, how talented they are. And it's a tough one to say that, oh yeah, Utah's going to win or USC is going to win, because it could go either way. They have Utah winning by 3. Typically what I've seen is that basically is just home field advantage. So in other words, they're kind of throwing this as a toss-up game, and I think it truly is. I easily believe that USC can, outplay Utah, but Utah, their only challenge really so far is BYU, and they only won by 1, but it was a big rivalry, so I give them, extra credit for, being a rivalry game. So this one's tough, but I think I still go with Utah on this one. I think USC is just going to struggle playing in Salt Lake, as many teams do. So I go Utah.
Yeah, USC is making a change at their quarterback position, going from Max Brown to Sam Darnold, who's a redshirt freshman. So USC is currently favored by 3 at home. I think they'll win by at least that amount. This was a hard game for me to pick, though, just because USC's athleticism. But for a freshman to go on the road at Utah, Marcus, as you mentioned, Utah is a fantastic home team. And I just think it'll be too big, too bright of lights for the freshman quarterback to overcome. But college football is better when USC is good. So I actually hope that I'm proven wrong, just because I think it'd be nice to see them have a little bit of a spark. But I think Utah will win this game by more than 3.
Utah is a very tough place to play. Ranked in the top 20, I have them about the 15th toughest place to play. That being said, going into this game, USC has had far tougher of a schedule with Alabama and Stanford to date, as well as Utah State, where Utah had Southern Utah, San Jose State, and BYU. Even though BYU is a rivalry, I think USC's been tested. They looked good in one of their games. Yeah, I know they didn't look good against Stanford, but I'm going to give USC the nod here. I think USC beats Utah.
I think that's a good pick, because Utah was slow against Southern Utah, and then they struggled against San Jose State this last week. And San Jose State isn't typically, your powerhouse Mountain West team. And so I think it is a fair assessment that they will struggle. I just don't know if USC can handle it in Salt Lake. But I do agree that it is quite possible that USC is the better team, just because Utah has looked weak against lesser opponents.
Yeah, it's a sneaky pick. It's a sneaky game. Tough place to play, but I think USC just has the better athletes across the board. Looking at LSU at Auburn, this is maybe another one of those really sneaky games. I know, Michael, you have a little something on this game.
Yeah, and, I wanted to see Auburn. I wanted to see Clemson being validated by Auburn doing well, and they just haven't. They've fallen flat. I know the game is at Auburn. LSU's favored by 3.5. Keep in mind that LSU has a new quarterback, Danny Etling. He made his first start and won it last week against Mississippi State, and so I expect them to carry that momentum and beat Auburn on the road, especially with Leonard Fournette back. Auburn's been holding opponents to under 20 points roughly a game. I haven't checked the official stat line on that.
It's 21
but
average.
It's 21. Okay, it's just from looking at scores, it feels like around 20. But I do believe that LSU will go in there and win, and puts Gus Malzahn again squarely on the hot seat that we had talked about earlier.
I'm gonna jump there, and I'm actually rounding that up. It is 20.66 average, but I'll jump real fast since I'm already here. This is a tough one. The game is at Auburn, and so there's a benefit to that game being at home. LSU has not looked very good. Auburn struggles on offense though, and because of that, I think the nod goes to LSU. They're only scoring average of 26 points a game. That being said, when they're playing a decent opponent, they're averaging about 15 points a game, whereas LSU is averaging about 21 points a game. I really want to pick Auburn, but I'm not going to. I'm going to take LSU.
They've both played two pretty decent teams. Auburn lost close to Clemson, and then lost by just under 13 points to Texas A&M. Both pretty decent teams, and then they beat Arkansas State pretty solidly, whereas LSU barely lost to Wisconsin, which I'm still not convinced Wisconsin's a great team, but they could be. And then they struggled against Jacksonville State, a FCS team that Ryan made fun of me for saying that they had a chance of beating LSU, which obviously they lost, but it was tougher than it should have been. And then they had a very close win in Mississippi State, who I'm also not super convinced is great. So I think this is two teams who have played tough teams who aren't that great. So I think it's a tough one to pick, but just because I'm not a big fan of either of them, and Auburn is bigger rivalry to Alabama, I'm going to pick Auburn.
What I do like here is the fact that both have fairly good defenses and offenses that have been struggling. So I'll take the under 45 points here. Looking next game, we're going to go to the Big 12. We've got Oklahoma State and Baylor. There's not a lot we have on this game, but we're going to give a quick prediction across the board. Michael, let's start with you.
Baylor's favored by 8. This is actually a really, really tough game for me to pick. I do think that they win, but I think Oklahoma State covers. Oklahoma State has had the tougher schedule. They beat a very rugged Pitt team last week. I think they're definitely more battle-tested. I'm just not sure if they've seen an offense like Baylor's. And from what I've seen from Baylor, I've been really impressed. But then again, they haven't really played anybody.
I'm going to go with Oklahoma State on this one. I think they would be undefeated had, that unfortunate call against Central Michigan. If that didn't happen, they'd be undefeated. And I think they are a stronger team than Baylor. Baylor hasn't really been tested much. Oklahoma State's had a little bit of a test. I think Oklahoma State's a better team, and so I got to give it to them, even though it's at Baylor, which might be difficult.
Yeah, though the game is in Waco, I still have to look at coaching changes and stuff. Baylor hasn't played anyone to date. They've played a Northwestern State, SMU, and Rice, having a fairly weak schedule to date. Actually, in my rankings of algorithm rankings, Baylor ranks 112th worst, where Oklahoma State I have 49th best strength of schedule. So there's quite a big difference there. As you said, it all comes down kind of to one play, one blown call from being undefeated. And Central Michigan's not a bad team either. As I look at this, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I give the nod to Oklahoma State in this one. Last game of our quick picks is going to be Washington and Arizona, moving over to the Pac-12. Washington, Arizona. Here we go. Michael, you're up.
I think Arizona's a really tough team to play in Tucson. I think Washington will win the game, but I think Arizona covers the 10.5-point spread. Jake Browning for Washington has thrown 12 touchdowns without any interceptions on the year. I believe they've won their last 8 games dating back to last season. So I think that they're on a little bit of a roll right now. And again, I do expect Washington to win, but I just think that's a lot of points to give Arizona at home.
I easily pick Washington on this one. Arizona lost on a last-second field goal to BYU from a true freshman who wasn't even going to go to the game. But BYU has turned out to not be a super strong team. And then they barely beat Grambling State, and then, had a decent game last week against Hawaii. Washington has only played Rutgers, Idaho, and Portland State, but they've handled all 3 of them pretty dang well. Yes, it's in Arizona, but you can't hardly ever bet against Coach Pete, and so I go with Washington on this one.
It's an interesting game. As you said, it's tough to play down there in Arizona. I think looking at scores, that Washington is the better team, averaging 49 points, while Arizona's averaging 31. They've both played fairly equal schedules.
Equally weak schedules, yes.
Equally weak schedules is correct. And Arizona has given up about 12 more points a game than Washington has. For that reason, on the road, I give the nod to Washington. I'm not saying it's going to be more than 14 points, and the spread I think was 10.5 if you can find it in the right places. That's 10 points is probably right about right. Anywhere between 7 and 10 points, I think Washington wins this game. So those are our quick ones. Not that those were very quick, but now we're going to get on to the better games, the more elite and prestigious matchups. Starting with Stanford and UCLA, we'll stay in the Pac-12, but this is one of those games that people circle at the beginning of the year.
I think UCLA is a little bit better than they've shown so far. They had a close loss against Texas A&M at Texas A&M, so give them a little bit of credit for that one. Seeing as how Texas A&M, I believe, is top 10 team right now, and then they handled UNLV pretty well, and then beat BYU in Provo, which is pretty dang hard to do. Both BYU and Utah are extremely difficult to play at home, and so to go in there and win, especially as BYU, scored in the last minute to inflate the score a little bit. I think UCLA has a great chance at winning this one. Then again, it's hard to bet against Stanford and McCaffrey. So I'm going to go with Stanford just to keep the Pac-12's hopes alive for a playoff berth this year.
I'm super impressed with Stanford. I think McCaffrey continues to be the Swiss Army knife that they need him to be. He's a dynamic game changer that I just don't think anybody can truly prepare for. I think Stanford wins the game by at least a touchdown. I've just been really, really impressed with Stanford so far this year. I really hope that they end up making it in the top 4 because they just execute so well.
Looking at this game, it's hard to really tell differences just based on numbers. UCLA's played a little bit tougher of a schedule. They actually have a higher offensive average scoring wise, but they give up more points on defense. And thinking about the team, I would think UCLA's offense is worse than their defense. But the numbers say otherwise. As I look at this, it helps that the game's at UCLA. I really want to pick UCLA in this game, but I think McCaffrey's going to be too much for the UCLA defense. This is another springboard game. It's a jumping off point for Stanford. They've got 4 tough weeks with UCLA, Washington State, and Notre Dame. If they win this game, there's a chance that College Game Day could be at their game next week for Washington, and if not at the Notre Dame game. But as I said that as well, 3 of these games are away, with the Washington State game being home for Stanford. So if they want to have a chance to go to the Final Four and play for the championship, they have to go 4-0 right now. This is the meat of their schedule. I'm going to give it to Stanford, even though I really want to pick UCLA. I just think Stanford has too much to offer in this game, and they'll just be too much for UCLA to stop. Moving down to the cocktail party, which I don't think we can call it that anymore. Florida and Tennessee. Michael?
Yeah, this is kind of my neck of the woods, and I picked Tennessee to do very, very well this year, and I think they've been pretty inconsistent thus far. Currently, Tennessee's favored by 6.5 points. I think they will ultimately win by a touchdown, which breaks an 11-game losing streak against Florida. Keep in mind, Tennessee gave this game away last year in Gainesville. I really do think that they have the ability to beat Florida, but gosh darn it. I mean, this is do or die time for Butch Jones. If Tennessee loses this game, this is kind of their game, one of their bigger rivalry games. I think he could squarely be on the hot seat after this if they lose.
When I look at this one, they both have played pretty weak schedules up to this point.
Yeah.
But Florida has done better against a weak schedule than Tennessee has. Tennessee beat Appalachian State by a touchdown at home. They did play pretty well against Virginia Tech. They definitely redeemed themselves there in that second game, but they did struggle against Ohio.
Frank Solich coached Ohio. I think Ohio is actually, well, we won't get into that, but I definitely think Ohio is. If we want to talk about how great Ohio is, to make Tennessee looks better, that's kind of sad. I guess that's kind of my point. But
that's true.
You're right. They've definitely had a much tougher time with supposedly easier opponents.
Right, and I think they do have an advantage that this is their fourth straight game to start the season at home. You don't typically see that, and so I think they definitely do have an advantage there, that it is at home and that they've won 3 in a row at home to start the season. It's hard for me to look past those games that they struggled in when Florida didn't struggle as badly. Yes, they both, didn't have great schedule and didn't play super great. So I think it'll be a fun game to watch. I think it'll be a tight game, but I do got to give this one to Florida, and not just to make Michael upset, but I do think Florida has shown themselves a little bit better than Tennessee. And I think Michael can agree to that to some extent.
It's all fair. It's all fair points. This is kind of like, if Tennessee loses, I'm off. I'm done. I think most Tennessee fans are. It's just,
bandwagon over.
Marcus, good pick. Marcus, that was a good pick. I'm just messing with you there. Actually, as I do look at this game, it's a rivalry, and it's going to come down to turnovers, honestly. Who can start strong, but turnovers is the key here. Either team can win this game, and I don't think it's going to be by much. I think Florida beats Tennessee last-second field goal. Moving down to we got 2 more in the SEC by 1 more in the Big Ten. We got Arkansas and A&M. The game is at A&M. Marcus, how about you start us off there?
I don't think Arkansas has really proven themselves too much this year. Yeah, they're 3-0. Yeah, they're in the top 25. But if you're an SEC team and you have at least 2 wins at this point, you're going to be ranked, just because that's what they do. But Arkansas barely beat Louisiana Tech at home. They beat a weaker than has been in the recent past TCU at TCU by 3. And then they played well at home against Texas State. I think Arkansas is not as great as they appear on just looking at their record, especially with that struggle game against La Tech at home. So Texas A&M, they've proven themselves a little bit better. They beat UCLA in their season opener, and then they beat Auburn at Auburn 2 weeks later. So I think I go with Texas A&M on this one, just because Arkansas, struggled against weaker teams, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think initially when we were talking about this, I was like, you know what, I want to pick Arkansas, but after thinking about it and after doing some more research, it's really hard to bet against Texas A&M, A, because they're at home, and B, they're scoring more points and giving up less than Arkansas on the year. And I think A&M's defense is actually widely underrated. And so I'm going to say that A&M, they're favored by 5.5. I think they'll win by at least a touchdown. But be careful of Arkansas's ball control offense that could keep the scoring very low in this game and might give them a puncher's chance.
Fair schedule is kind of coming into this. They're pretty even. I think Arkansas maybe has a little bit of an edge when you think about TCU, but at the same time you could say that UCLA and Auburn hang there, but Auburn I don't think is quite as good as most people think they are. A&M scoring about 12 points more on offense to 7 points fewer on defense. The fact that it's a home game, I'll give the edge to A&M. Once again, that's a tough game to pick. Moving to the Georgia-Ole Miss game, this is fun. This one should be a lot of fun if you want one team to win. I'm just kidding. I know where I lean on this pick, but Michael, let's go Marcus here. Marcus, you're laughing. I think you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, I think this is a joke of a top 25 matchup. No, I'm gonna dog on the voters. This is pretty messed up in my opinion. First off, I give the win to Georgia, strictly based off of everything I'm about to say. Georgia is not good. They beat UNC by, what is that, 9. Decent win. But then they beat Nicholls State by 2 at home. Are you kidding me? And then they beat Mizzou by 1 at Missouri, which, that's not a bad game, not a bad win to have. But by 1, the previous week by 2 to Nicholls State at home, and then 9 to UNC. That's bad. But I think Ole Miss is worse. How can you possibly rank a team with 2 losses, 1 and 2, in the top 25? I don't care who those 2 losses were to. I don't care if it was to the number 1 team twice. You just can't do that when there's how many undefeated teams, Ryan? I'm sure you have the number somewhere.
There are 37 undefeated teams.
And how many of those are in the Power 5? Just a guesstimate, unless you have the actual number.
I would guess it's probably about 35. No, I'm sorry, excuse me, not 35. I would guess it's about 30 of those.
30 of those are probably Power 5. And you got one team with 2 losses in there. Yes, they lost to Florida State. It was a semi-close game. It was also at home. But Florida State just got manhandled by Louisville. Now, Louisville, I think, is top 2, maybe top 3 team in the country right now. But they absolutely destroyed the Seminoles. And that was their first loss. Then they go and beat Wofford, a FCS team at home. Yeah, they won by 25, big whoop, FCS. And then they played a tight game against Alabama. I think they should have won the game. But they still have 2 losses, and their only win is the FCS. I don't care if they have the team that could still win the national championship. They shouldn't be ranked right now when you've got other teams that are undefeated and may not be as good physically, but on paper they're better right now. Why are they there? So based off of all that, off of principle, I don't care how bad Georgia is, I pick them because I think Ole Miss should not be where they're at, and I think Ole Miss probably will win this game, but I pick Georgia just off of principle.
37 undefeated teams, 12 of them are not from a Power 5 conference. That means 25 are still from a Power 5. Even if you include some teams with a 1 loss to some of those higher ranking teams, I agree, a 2-loss team maybe should not be in there, even though that they've lost to teams very high in the rankings. Michael, what's your take on this game?
I just like that Marcus called Wofford because I think most of their fans probably call them Wofford because they aren't a very good football team. Anyways, that's beside the point. So
they got the woes.
So Ole Miss,
I blame it on my Spanish background.
Ole Miss has been up by multiple scores in both of their losses. I completely agree with Marcus. Georgia has been extremely unimpressive today. This is as weak of a 2 top 25 team matchup that you can possibly get. But given all the reasons that Marcus said, I'm going to go with Ole Miss because I just think that they're better. I don't think Georgia has been very impressive. And although Ole Miss hasn't really been able to finish a game, Georgia's won by 1. Okay, the win against Missouri is really good because Georgia really struggles with Missouri for whatever reason. But I just think that Ole Miss is going to win by more than a touchdown because I just don't think Georgia is really all that strong. And I don't think Ole Miss should be ranked, but I still think that they're a halfway decent team.
I think they're a good team, and I think they probably will win, but I just want to pick Georgia's because I'm fed up with the whole Ole Miss is in the SEC. And I know that's probably just my opinion. Ryan and I have talked heavily about this, but I think they're getting a little bit of favoritism because there are other teams who have lost to 2 ranked teams and they're not in there.
And their 2 losses were atrocious. I mean, they had the lead. They had significant leads in both games that they lost, which I think that just shows the ineptitude of coaching, and who knows if some of the off-field distractions of maybe a potential NCAA probe is kind of leaning in on them.
Well, Marcus, sorry to break this to you, but you're going to wake up Sunday, you're going to look at the rankings, and Ole Miss is still going to be in there. I
hope not.
They're going to need it between a 14 and 21 point lead at halftime, and hope that they still don't blow that. If they have that lead at halftime, I think they win this game because we know that with this Ole Miss team, they're gonna get after you quick. But the second half is where adjustments are being made, and they're failing in the adjustments, and that's coaching, but it's also in some of the playing. But Ole Miss is going to need to be up, and I just think that Ole Miss has too much talent, speed, that Georgia won't be able to hang with them, and that's about it. I'm not impressed with Taylor Kelly. I don't think he's that great of a quarterback. He said he's the best in the nation. He's probably not even the best in his conference.
Chad Kelly.
But I will. Oh yeah, sorry, excuse me. Ooh, Taylor, I'm going the wrong way there. Chad Kelly.
Opposite
See, that's
side.
how
I like
much
that little Boise reference.
that's how much
I like
I'm not even impressed by him. I don't even know his name. But yeah, no, it's at Ole Miss. I'm taking Ole Miss in this game.
So let me ask you this: Georgia's ranked number 12. Ole Miss loses to them. 3 losses against 3 top 12 teams. Do we still rank them? Obviously not. But the argument that they lost to 2 top-ranked teams and so they should still be in there versus they lost to 3 top-ranked teams and they shouldn't be in there, I find hard to justify between the two of them. But that's just me.
Well, I mean, they dropped from a high ranking, and then they dropped from a middle ranking, and they'll drop again. But they won't. I mean, they won't drop, but probably too far below 30 or 35. They'll still be in that kind of 32-ish.
Well, and they'll be 1-3 and still be ranked above half of the undefeated teams, and I think that's a joke. Yeah. But that's just me.
Strength of schedule.
They're not going to be
Strength
ranked,
of schedule.
though, if they lose.
I'm just giving you a hard time. Okay, we got one game left. We're going to move to the Big Ten for an undefeated matchup between Wisconsin at Michigan State. I had to think about that one for a second. Marcus, you've been fired up tonight, so we're going to let you start.
Yeah, I don't know what's gotten into me. I thought this was a fairly. I mean, the last 4 games we're going over are two top 25 teams in each of the last 4, and I came into this thinking it was going to be a boring week, but apparently my emotions said otherwise. So yeah, this matchup I think is good. I don't think Wisconsin's as good as they're playing, or as good as it looks. I don't think LSU's as good as they are claimed to be, and so that win looks a little bit weaker in my opinion. But mostly, I just want to talk about the Big Ten here. Side note, I picked Michigan State to win this one. But, I mean, looking at the Big Ten, the East Division has 5 undefeated teams, and the other 2 teams have 1 loss apiece. And the Western Division has 3 undefeated teams, 2 with 1 loss, and then 2 with 2 losses. That is amazing to me. If all the undefeated teams win again, they should all be ranked easily in the top 25. Every time I've come up with my top 25, except for this last week when Iowa lost, I had 5 of them in the top 10. That I didn't do that on purpose. I don't love the Big Ten. If there's any Power 10 conference I like, it's the Pac-12. But I just can't get over how good this conference is. I still think Michigan's going to take the whole thing, but Ohio State, Michigan State, even Nebraska, and maybe Wisconsin, they're all going to be super good this year. It's going to be a tough conference to get out alive. But I think if any of the teams make the Final Four, they'll be in the championship, and it'll be tough to beat them unless it's maybe against Louisville. So, yeah, I picked Michigan State based off of Wisconsin's win over LSU seems inflated to me.
Yeah, and if we want to talk about inflated, which I can't disagree with you on Wisconsin beating LSU, I just can't go against what my eyes saw in that game, which was Wisconsin physically beating up what is supposed to be a very dominant team, at least along the line of scrimmage in LSU. And because I saw that, I was just thoroughly impressed. I think Wisconsin had a lot of chances in that game, especially in the first half. And so I think the score was even lower than it could have been. I think they should have beaten them by more. But something interesting about Michigan State, that win over Notre Dame, I was like, wow, I'm super impressed. I was watching the game, and I was like, okay, so Texas beat them, and then Texas loses to Cal, and then, you start to realize that Notre Dame's defense isn't that good. So how great of a win was Michigan State's last week over Notre Dame? I think really this is where both teams' season starts, because I think both the supposed best teams that in the country that they've played, those teams aren't really performing right now. So I would love – these Big Ten home games are so tough, but I'm just going to go with what I have seen, and I've just seen Wisconsin even more physical than Michigan State, which is kind of tough to say. So I'm just going to say that Wisconsin wins. And I don't really have much of a rhyme or reason behind it other than just what I've seen.
The games at home for Michigan State, I was not impressed with Michigan State. I watched their first game against Furman, and then I watched them against Notre Dame, and they were up big, and then they let Notre Dame back into it. And I'm going to tell you, Notre Dame's defense is garbage, but I'm not impressed with Wisconsin. I've watched Wisconsin as well. I watched them against Georgia
It's a hard
State.
game to pick.
I watched them against LSU, and they rolled against Akron, but I mean, it's Akron.
The Zips.
Go Zips.
As I look at this game, because it's at Michigan State, I'm going to give Michigan State the edge, but I'm not going to give them a huge edge. I think 10, 13 points, which is maybe that is huge. But I'm not impressed with Wisconsin. I think Michigan State wins this game. Okay, so that is our preview of our 10 games. Sorry that took you about 37 minutes, guys. But all we have left are just a couple of our upsets of the week. And Marcus, we're going to start with you.
One that I think isn't probably as big as an upset as it really is. And it kind of goes against my morals to do this. But the first smaller upset that I go with is BYU over West Virginia. I think BYU has played some tough games against some tough opponents. They barely won their first game, and then they had close games in their second and third games. So I think they're better than the record is, as much as I don't want to say that. So I think they will beat West Virginia.
Put on your white button down and put a name tag on. He's here to change your mind on BYU.
Well played, well played. Just because I went there doesn't mean I'm a fan. So me saying that means a lot. Another one that is kind of a hometown plug, but Boise State has never beaten Oregon State in Corvallis, Oregon. And they are favored by 13, so it's not really an upset, but to anyone who's paid attention to their series at all in the past, it actually is kind of a pseudo upset, if you will. But the real upset that I want to pick is South Florida over Florida State. It's in Tampa at South Florida. Florida State is favored by 5.5, which I think is really low for, number 13 team, previously number 2 or whatever they were. They did just get completely owned by Louisville. And, Ryan and I have talked before that maybe that's going to, boost their morale and say, hey, we're going to, go out and kick some trash in the next game. But, South Florida, they're in a weaker conference. But, I saw someone after the top 25s were released, someone tweeted out and said, no love for South Florida. They haven't played the strongest schedule FCS team to start with. Northern Illinois, who has been good in the recent past, but I believe they're 0-3 now. So that doesn't look super great. But then they beat Syracuse by 25. Syracuse obviously isn't, a stellar team, but they are an ACC team. So it would be a very rough game for South Florida to win. If they win this, I think they jump into the top 25 or close to it. Gives them a nice little ego boost going into American Athletic Conference games, first against Cincinnati. So I'm going to go with South Florida on this one, just because I'm not super impressed with Florida State, even though they beat Ole Miss. But again, I'm not impressed with Ole Miss. So
I think that's a low line, as you said. And with what Florida State did last week, are you all expecting that Florida State just comes out and romps? I mean, I know South Florida's 3-0, but do you expect do you expect Florida State just to come out and just take care of business?
Well, I think that's not the issue. I think the issue is that South Florida is going to see how bad Florida State got destroyed by Louisville and is going to be like, wow, those guys, they're supposed to be this great team, but they got destroyed, and they're going to come out pumped up thinking, yeah, we got this. But I do believe Florida State's going to come out pumped and be like, we got to take care of business and, correct what happened last week. I just think South Florida's motivation being at home and their 3-0 record, seeing how bad Florida State just got beat, I think that's going to be a little bit of extra motivation than actually being beaten by that bad. So I think South Florida is going to come out swinging, playing hard, and hoping that they can, carry on the momentum from Louisville and do some damage to Florida State, kick them out of the top 25. And
I'm not sure about that pick. It's really interesting. I mean, you were right last week about North Dakota State, I believe.
Yes, I was, and you better believe it.
And I'm giving you credit. But as I look at this, I don't think South Florida has done much ever since Matt Grothe was their quarterback. But he had a great game against Florida State, and maybe it sets up for that. As I look at South Florida at 3-0, this maybe is quite a tricky game. Michael, what's your upset of the week?
This is more along betting lines, but I do think it's an interesting game. Michigan is favored by 18.5 points at home against Penn State. Michigan has also benefited from playing weaker teams. Their first somewhat decent test against Colorado, they were a little bit flat early on, and I know they came back and won the game, which is a big confidence boost for them, but I think Penn State is a tougher opponent than Colorado, and I do believe that they can hang with them for a little while. 18.5 points just seems a little high for an in-conference opponent.
Michigan does look good at times, but they've struggled in the first quarter or so in a lot of their games. Penn State can score points, so that's probably a fair pick. I've got two games here. Colorado, as you just mentioned, Colorado's playing Oregon. They're playing at Oregon, which is a very tough place to play. The line's 10.5 points. I think Oregon struggled quite a lot here, actually, in their first few games, and Colorado's looked pretty good. I'm going to take Colorado by 10.5, and then the other game I have is Pittsburgh against North Carolina. North Carolina's favored by a touchdown. I think Pitt can score points. North Carolina's also kind of struggled in some other instances, so I'm going to take Pitt. Pitt to either win or just lose by less than a touchdown. That is our podcast for week 4. Hope you guys enjoy the week, and hit us up, and we'll answer your guys' questions next week. Have a good one.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.